You're listening to The Grind. Well-caffeinated conversations with disc golfers who are passionate about improving their games and helping others to do the same. Welcome to episode 9 of The Grind, a disc golf podcast. I'm Josiah, and with me, my good friend David. We're going to talk some disc golf.
How's it going, guys?
We've got a great episode lined up for you today. We have a pro tip from Raven Newsom, who's a 1021 touring pro, sponsored by MVP. We're going to talk about what division you should start in for your first tournament if you're thinking about getting into one, and when you should move up. This is somewhat applicable to me, perhaps. And we are going to review the Axiom Pyro. But first, David, as always, I got to ask you, what are you sipping on, and how was your disc golf week?
Yeah, today we're sipping on some Honduras from the Las Lajitas farm. Man, this is a fun cup. We've had a couple natural coffees that we've talked about on the podcast before. I think at Ethiopia Guji. This is reminiscent of it because it is also a natural process coffee.
Natural process is where it's dried with the fruit on?
Yep, with the cherry on the bean, and so it absorbs some of the fruitiness. So, man, we're kind of getting... Today, I think before, I've had it multiple times. What I describe it to people is if you've ever had those Brookstone dark chocolate covered acai berries.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
Definitely gets that kind of pungent acidity of the acai with the dark chocolate. Today, when I sipped it, I was tasting more dark cherry. But I mean, it's kind of a lot of, I think you're getting some of the acidity as that you associate with berries or fruit. And then you just kind of get that chocolate layer that gives you, it's a tasty cup. It's not necessarily something I want every day, but it's super fun on the palate.
Yeah, it's really good. Cherry, definitely. Chocolate cherry. I think those notes, whether you said them or not, I would have identified them. It definitely, I can just keep saying chocolate cherry. That's all I got. It's a good cup. And thanks to Kiln Coffee Bar for providing the coffee for this episode. How was your week?
Dude, week was great, man. We had our disc golf tournament at Palisade.
Yeah.
It's pretty fantastic. I think Josiah's week maybe was a little bit better than mine. Josiah will get to that.
Hey, you scored one stroke better than me.
Yeah. So I, for the tournament we talked about some on the podcast that we were going to be in, I ended up finishing 9th out of 22 in the advanced division. Kind of an up and down tournament for me. I was hoping to shoot around par. I think -2 ended up winning the tournament in advanced. I ended up shooting plus 12. My 3 rounds were plus 6, plus 2, and plus 4. Yeah, kind of an up and down tournament. Felt really good about my putting. Cashed 3 jump putts, which I was very excited about starting to cash some jump putts.
Yeah, you've been trying them in tournaments for a while and just hadn't quite got the touch.
I had only landed 1 before in a tournament, and now I feel like, man, I can hit at least 2 or 3 out of 10, which feels really good.
Yeah, that's awesome.
As an amateur player, it feels really good to have that because those are definitely not ones you're necessarily counting on. Drives were okay. Upshots we talked about last week about how important it is to get close to the basket. My upshots were not great this weekend. I think that's what put a lot of stress on my mind through the tournament and having to have a lot of 30 to 50 foot putts that are definitely not as easy to cash as the 20-footers. And so I felt like I was just working hard to catch up the entire time. But man, overall, I had a blast with the tournament. Walking away, Josiah's going to share a little bit about his round. I think we're getting through the tournament for me was definitely keeping up with his score because it's super exciting watching what he was doing. Man, fun week. I ended up being able to play Salt Wash for the first time.
Yeah, nice.
It's Salt Wash is a little small 9-hole course behind my house. It's a super fun course.
It's great.
But during the winter, it's been covered in snow, super muddy, disgusting, but it's finally dry, and it's such a fun course.
So good for your skills, though. It's different than anything else.
It is. Most of the shots are 200 to 250 feet, and they're just technical shots.
Yeah, a lot of elevation gain and loss, lots of really tight landing spots on top of mounds and stuff.
Yep. So I'm excited for more rounds there. Fun week, man. Fun week. How about you, man?
Yeah, it was. It's about as good as a disc golf week as I've had. I played within myself, not quite as well as I would hope at the tournament. I think my drives were not as good as I had hoped in terms of accuracy or power. I think I lost that as I went during the week. I had a lot more forehands than I expected, and I executed those really well. I was super stoked. I know you birdied it, but I think you parked it. But there's a long 360, and it plays a long 360, pretty deep right, dead straight shot, or sorry, through a pretty tight double mando, one of the holes for the tournament we played. And the only way to get there was a forehand, and I got within 40 and then made my putt.
Oh, sick. I didn't
so
realize you
yeah,
got that
I was stoked about that. So I had some really good forehands. My putting was great. I went back and put my rounds in UDisc, and I shot like 88% C1X. So I mean, really great putting. I felt good about my putting, but more than anything, my upshots were just made the game so easy. And it's the opposite of you experienced. My driving was not that great, and I didn't scramble that well when I was like a little off balance or whatever. I feel like I added some strokes there. I want to work on it, especially like the lean out, and also just committing to not having to park an upshot. But when you are scrambling, it's a little harder, just making sure you give yourself a putt. A few times I didn't do that. But it's a longer course. Most of the holes aren't birdieable for me. And so just those little Berg Annie upshots and the jump putts that were mostly upshots, I was just killing it. Like I was giving myself no putt or like a 15-foot putt. I think one of the reasons my C1X percentage was so good is most of my putts were between like 12 and 20 feet, just made it super easy on myself. I was leading after one round in intermediate, which I was pretty stoked about because I didn't feel like I played that great, and I wasn't checking my score. Leading after round two, and when I thought I was probably like 10th or something because I just felt like I wasn't playing that great. I was playing fine. I was making some good shots, but I was bottom of my box on the lead card for a while. So I was pretty stoked because I had 3 strokes on the next person, and then like 5 or 6 on the person in third. And then third round, I opened up with a par, and the guy in second double bogeyed, and I was like, all right, I got 5 strokes. I know we have 18 holes left as a 19-hole course, but this is gonna be easy. I'm gonna cruise to a win. And I've had a hard time performing under pressure in tournaments, and I felt really comfortable the whole tournament, and I felt comfortable in the lead. I felt like, you know what, 5 strokes, I'm just gonna make it easy on myself. I'm gonna play smart and safe. A few times I went for shots that I probably shouldn't have and bogeyed or almost bogeyed, but in general I played smart and safe. Didn't go for a lot of birdies. Took it easy. Trusted my upshot game. And kind of cruised through the round. Never made any birdies the third round, actually, but kept my bogeys down and, scored +5. Going into the very last hole, I did check the scores just to see if I could lay up and make it easy. It's a really tough birdie, and I had bogeyed it the 2 previous rounds. And one of the guys from the chase card, who is 7 strokes back to start the round, was now 1 stroke back with 1 hole to play. And he had just birdied like a 470-foot hole, and he was on like a 420-foot tough hole. And I was like, oh, dang, man, I guess I got to go for this birdie and just try to close the door, because if he does birdie this and I par, we're going to go to a playoff. Well, my drive was crap, but thankfully my upshot was great. I left myself a 15-footer, and then I made my 15-footer in a little bit of wind with a little bit of pressure, obviously knowing that I needed to make that if I wanted to win. Well, the guy parks this 420-foot hole with OB on both sides in this like ripping tailwind.
Ridiculous hole to birdie. In any division, a birdie would have been good, and in intermediate is just ridiculous. And to park it, I mean, yep. So then I had a long walk from that hole back to the parking lot, and we went to a playoff, and he went first, and he put his drive to about 40 feet in some reeds. I put my drive to 15 feet. He missed his putt. He almost made it. It was just a little low. And I thankfully, the drive felt good. I felt confident, read the drive well. I thought it was going to be right under the basket, but didn't get quite the skip I expected, but then made my 15-footer in some crosswind and took home my first win. Yeah, sure, it's intermediate, but it's a win. So I was stoked about it, man. It was a very different ending than I expected. I kind of thought, man, if I can play just okay and be gaining strokes, there's no way anybody's going to catch me. But the guy who finished second in the end, had all the skills, and he put it together for a round. And so it was one of those things that I was really happy that I stayed focused. I didn't feel intimidated by it. I felt confident the whole time, even through the end when I had to,
yeah, I needed to par, and then went to the playoff, and thankfully didn't have to play like 11 holes of the playoff. My body felt good, but I didn't necessarily. I was glad to finish it off in one hole, take the win, and go home. So some things I can work on for sure, but heck of a disc golf week for sure.
Yeah, for sure, man. That was super fun to watch. I think I talked about, was harassing you a bit last week about I've been bummed about your performance so far in tournaments because I want to be able to cheer you on. But this tournament, your performance is what really helped out my weekend and getting through all 3 rounds because I was so stoked for your performance and what you're doing. So thank you, Josiah.
You're a good friend, dude. I was glad it was me for once. Selfishly. If you want to hear a blow-by-blow full recap, I kept it to like 5 minutes there. If you want to hear a full 20 minutes of it, you can join our Patreon, become a patron. We do about 15 to now 30 minutes of bonus content, really just a mini podcast. And you can support the show and help us, encourage us to keep doing what we're doing. Want to thank Joel for becoming our latest patron. Thanks for supporting the show. We really appreciate you. But yeah, you want to get into a pro tip?
Yeah, let's do it, man.
So it's time for the how did you do that pro tip. This time from Raven Newsom. Big thanks to Raven. He was one of the first people to get back to with a pro tip, but I thought his tip was actually one that I wanted to save for a bit. So I asked Raven, what's one thing that separates AMs and lower level open players from top pros? And he said, release point consistency is always what holds players up. All of that comes from proper footwork. That's where every throw is built from: backhand, forehand, and putting. And David, I'm going to let you lead this one. What do you think about the pro tip, man?
I love this, man. I feel like each week I get so excited about each pro tip. It's been fun seeing these come in. This is something that's been huge for my game recently. I talked about going down to Austin earlier on the podcast, playing at sea level for one of the first times, realizing how much I rely on just torquing the disc as opposed to having a clean release point, especially with my forehand. And that's something that I've been working on with my backhand, and realizing too with like putting. When I know I'm at my best, I was just working with my wife on putting last night, and I know I'm at my best.
You guys are the new disc golf power couple, man.
Yep, there you go.
Hannah and Paul Macbeth, move aside.
I was explaining.
I'm sure there's others too.
Explaining to my wife, when I feel that like I'm at best with my putting, I feel like I'm just snapping with my release point directly at the basket, and I'm having that clean release point, knowing that I'm moving directly at the basket. Because one of the things that she does is she kind of sweeps her hand out to the right.
Oh yeah,
and she can get fairly consistent at it, but it's just not reliable over the long haul. The same thing, I mean, once you get that basic concept with your putting, you move it to your up shots, you move it to your drives. It's so fundamental because you think that if you want something to be repeatable, you have to be able to have it programmed in your brain to get to that point. And so I think having that release point in your mind is huge. And I think that's absolutely true. I think as I've grown more and more in my game, this is something that I've really focused on in elevating my game. So I thank you, Raven Newsom.
Yeah, this is awesome. And one of the reasons I had held back on it is I do think it's a concept that kind of marries all the skills together, but it's also hard. It's sometimes hard to apply when you're developing your game. And by that, I mean, if you're working on your backhand, you're changing your footwork all the time when you're messing with your form. That's going to change your release point. You know, and where you finish that last step versus how you started the next step, you know, that sort of thing. Or same thing with forehand, standstill, upshot, all of it. You know, even a putt is going to have footwork involved. That release point consistency is so tough to build when you're also building your game. And so this is one of those ones that I think is like, it's a pro tip. In other words, some of this I think is about being consistent about your footwork. So let's say for a backhand drive, because that's what I naturally think about. I noticed in the tournament in the second round that I was hurrying my footwork and it was messing up my release point. And I didn't want to think about it too much, but I just told myself, hey, slow, smooth, controlled, committed. And that little bit of going back to my old footwork pace and spacing fixed my late release issue in round. Like fixed it. It was just and it wasn't like, hey, I need to really pay attention to my steps. And I wouldn't recommend like trying to fix your footwork mid-tournament. But it was just for me like, hey, you're trying too hard. And I think that's been one of my biggest struggles with consistency and driving consistency in general, is that changing of pace and changing of footwork when you haven't. I mean, I think obviously the pros change their pace, but they have built that consistency at each pace through repetition. And I think for me, I need to keep a consistent pace with my backhand, forehand, putting, etc. Because when I change it up, I get inconsistent because I haven't practiced all the different speeds. You know, if I'm gonna walk up really slowly one hole and then really fast the other, I'm gonna have a different release point because the timing is going to be different. Same thing with the putt. And I love what you were saying about, you know, if you start the putt for a right-handed person on your left-hand side and bring it through to your right-hand side, you can get a lot of power from there. And I think it's a reasonable thing to do when you're out of your power range for a putt. But honestly, that just dead straight putt where you take it, whether it's a push putt, spin putt, whatever, where you take it from the center of your body and it stays on the same line with the basket the whole time. Putting consistency becomes so much easier because now your miss is primarily up and top, high and low, and not left and right. So I love this pro tip. I'm curious on the forehand how it applies, because I think my forehand I don't have that skill dialed in like you do, and I think that I'm pretty inconsistent with nose angle on my release point, but I'm curious how it applies that for you.
To be honest with you, I think it's something that I'm working into my game more, because I think when you do have those really overstable discs like the Flat Top Firebird, the Halo Wraith, you're ripping over on those discs, so you're not necessarily as focused, for me, at the release point. But when talking about hole 18 in the tournament with Palisade, it's that long forehanded shot. You're having to hit about 370 power through basically a tunnel all the way down. I need to have something that I can have that clean release point, and I'm throwing my Star Wraith there to get the distance. And that's something that if I am torquing over on the disc, like if I'm going to throw my Halo Wraith, I can torque over on it, and I know it's going to be predictable enough to come back. But the Star Wraith, if I torque over on it, no, it's going into the ground. I'm going to flip it right into the ground. So I really have to focus on having that clean release and having a smooth. I'm basically focused on having my palm up and having that clean release point at the front, very similar to my backhanded shot. And I think I am becoming more and more aware of that, because as my power has grown with my forehand, it's kind of changed and I've had to adapt with it. And I think initially my adapting was just disking up to controlling that power, and I lost my release point. And I think I've had to regain the release point in order to get more distance too. I think if I'm going to get the most distance, I'm going to my Star Wraith, and I have to have that clean release if I want to get the distance out of it, because I can get that Star Wraith out to, I have the chance to get 400, between 385 to 400 feet. I really have to have a clean release with it to get that.
Yeah, without it turning over, which is crazy to me. Yeah, I was super impressed with your like dead straight Wraith drives. You kept them like low and straight, and they just carried this tournament. I didn't see, in the practice rounds and the few shots I saw, I felt like your forehand's always been a tool and a skill, but I feel like it took another step, which is cool because you've been focused on your backhand. Not to get back into your game or whatever, but I just think it was pretty fun to watch.
For sure. And I definitely think it's a concept that I'm working on as well with I think the reason why I love this is it's something that I'm definitely working on. It's very applicable to where I'm at. And it's funny, like just talking to my wife about putting last night, like that's the one concept in my head when I'm putting. Like you can align yourself any way you want, but if you're not snapping straight at the basket and focused on that release point, I forget who it was early on listening to a YouTube video, but talking about basically like you're reaching out and shaking hands with the basket is what you're focused on. And that's your release point, is you're going out to shake hands with the basket. And that's what I focus on. And I know if I'm there, I can be off over here, I can be off over here. But if I'm here releasing as though I'm shaking hands with the basket, I'm going to hit the basket more often than not. If there's wind, maybe not. But I'm going to hit the basket.
You're going to hit the basket.
I'm going to hit the basket. I don't have to worry about going far from the basket.
Yeah, no, I love that. I definitely think my tendency on the putt is to do a little too much left to right and end up missing right a lot of times because my putters are pretty worn and pretty straight now, so they don't really fade into the basket. I think the other thing I was thinking about with this is, you're talking about release point accuracy, and I think you're talking about, hey, having a straight line from you to the basket on your putts. I think this is so applicable on upshots and on drives as well, and I'll think about backhand drives for me, which I struggled a little bit with release point accuracy on the tournament. But, if you end up with that big reach back, which we talked about early on the podcast, you end up having to drag the disc around your body and you end up building an arc. So it's almost impossible to have consistent release point because the disc is on this big wide arc. Of course, this is going to be on some arc, but when you reach out, or even if you leave the disc where it is basically and walk around it, the terminology, we'll leave that to the form experts. But I just find, for upshots and backhand drives, especially for me, that it just makes it so much easier to hit the line. It's just so much easier to hit the line when you take that swing and make the disc basically be on the same line the whole way. Now, obviously, with some biomechanics, it's not perfect. There is some movement left to right, but in general, the disc basically stays on the same line the whole way. And so when you release it, even if you're a little early or a little late, you're going to have much less of a error bar. You're going to have a much easier time hitting your gap. And so I just think this is something I want to work on, especially we've got a tournament coming up in a little bit tighter course. If you hit the initial gap, you're going to be fine. If you miss the initial gap, you may struggle all around. And last time I played, I didn't birdie at all the whole tournament.
Dang.
It's a shorter course. It shouldn't happen. I wasn't playing that well. My putting wasn't that great, but the biggest thing was I was late releasing every hole. And I think it was this thing where my timing was off and I was reaching back too much, etc. But if you can get that release point right at that, forehand, backhand, whatever, you're going to play well. And so I think it's applicable to me, and it's something I want to work on. It's not something I feel like I'm an expert on or can help all the listeners on. It's something that I'm just really growing in.
As far as talking about the release point, do you feel like this is something that is not necessarily early on beginners, but this is something that what takes you to the next level from, let's say, intermediate rec to advanced?
Yes.
I feel like
I'd say, honestly, it depends the course, but I think, honestly, this is why players that have power, that have putts, that have all the skills, don't put it together for a full tournament.
Mm-hmm.
I think honestly, it's the bedrock of consistency from the physical side. I think the mental game is, obviously very important, but I think it's biomechanically or mechanically the bedrock for consistency. And I think it's the reason so many players have big swings in their rounds is that release point consistency and that straight line, whether it's putt, drives, upshot, etc.
I think that's something that we're seeing with John's game right now. We talked about how he's jumped up to throwing 420, 430. He's pulling through, and he's really trying to find that release point. Every once in a while, he's landing where he wants to. Every once in a while, he's turning whether he's turning over his wraith or whatever it might be.
When you add 50 feet of power in a week, it's sometimes hard to adjust.
But it was fun to see him on, I think it's like hole 12 at Watson today.
Yeah.
He threw his T-Bird 3, and he was able to throw, I guess, this hole 11 at Watson, I think. He just threw it dead straight, and 12. He ended up landing at 12 at Watson. And he ended up landing it at the basket. He did exactly what he wanted to. I feel like it was the first time that I saw John slow himself down.
Yep.
And trust the fact that he had the power to get it there.
Yep.
And just get that clean release to where he wanted to, and he parked it. He got it right down there and did exactly what he wanted to. And I think, that's for him. Like, again, he's throwing 430, which is, as an amateur, it's just like, man, I'll take 430 all day.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, just give it to me.
But if you're not landing it where you want to land it, then 430 means nothing.
Sure.
It means absolutely nothing.
Just practically, the tournament we just played, that was the difference between, first and second place was not the power, but just the consistency.
Yeah.
Obviously, and the win read, which helped. But yeah, I think, honestly, trusting that you have the distance is one of the hardest things for AMs. Like trusting that you have the power so you can slow yourself down and you can build that consistency is tough. And you watch our buddy Ryan Wilking plays open and plays well and has all the power. He can down tempo and know he's going to reach the basket. He has to down tempo partially so he doesn't fly past the 300-foot basket with a putter, you know? So I do think that's part of it. And honestly, when I'm playing really well, I am just I'm not playing hard at all.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not having to throw hard. I'm not having to throw far, but the disc is going far. And occasionally it goes too far because you get the timing right. But I do think a lot of it is just, you know, like today on hole 10 with that envy shot, well, hole 9 and 10, those envy second shots that I threw for fun or first shots, those were all like easy throws, like no effort in them, you know, 290, 280 with an envy on a turnover. Like, and it's because I know I can trust that disc is going to go far enough. And I can't, if I throw it too hard, it's a beaten up envy on a turnover, it's going to stay turned over. So I think part of it is just trust.
For sure. And I think I love going again back to this release point. I think for me, if I would have been a little bit more focused on my release point earlier on, I feel like I would have built an understanding for discs better. I feel like it took me a long time to begin to understand understable, overstable, what's stable, and what I can get to go straight. I think finding that driver, like we talked about, I just started bagging an Essence in my bag. I had never really bagged much understable discs, but it is the disc now that is giving me, is really building that concept of a release point in my head. Because if I am turning it over, it's going to flip and it's going to keep going and riding to the right and where I don't want it to go.
Yeah, and a flat top Firebird on an Anheuser, you don't actually know what your release point is. Mm-hmm. Because if it's a little nose up, it's still going to fade really hard at the end. Mm-hmm. You know, in some ways, if you don't throw slower or more understable discs, I don't think you'll learn it as quickly because once again, like we were talking about, I think it was the second episode of the podcast is like when the disc immediately out of your hand does something different than the throw, because it's either very overstable or extremely understable, you know, if you've got some power. I do think you lose a little bit of that ability to learn and that ability to actually build that consistency.
Yeah, for sure. So I think this is something going back to with amateurs is we should, I mean, amateurs and pros, we should be bagging understable discs in order, especially learning. We talked about with Ryan throwing putters and mid-ranges in order to learn having that clean release point, because that's, at the end of the day, that's what's going to get us the distance, is getting that clean release. If we're focused on just trying to rip over on a high-speed driver, if we're just trying to rip over on a Wraith all day, yeah, it might be the quickest way to
Destroyer, Boss, etc.
It might be the quickest way for us to get some distance as an amateur, but it really, in the end, it's going to hurt us over the long haul. I think talking about earlier is like sometimes you have to be willing to take some steps back in order to take steps forward. And I think this is an area that you have to be willing to go back to the basics. If whatever it might be for you, throwing a buzz all the time, if it's Josiah loves throwing his Crave that we reviewed earlier on the podcast. For me, it's become the Essence. I love throwing it because it gets me back to being focused on, okay, I need to be here. I need to release here. If I'm not doing that, if I'm not there, then I'm going to be making other mistakes. Like in the tournament, I had 2 big turnover backhand drives that punished me for double bogeys. And if I was mentally focused on having that clean release, those wouldn't have happened.
Yeah, no, I think that makes total sense. The one thing I was thinking about too is that you can do both at the same time. Like you can throw those, 11, 12 speed drivers. If that's what's fun for you, you can do that. And you can, maybe bag a neutral mid like a Mako 3 or a Fuse is what Ryan Wilking, learned how to throw 500 feet on, and throw them on second shots or throw them on holes that it makes sense for, or play around and take the fastest out of your bag. You can kind of take like a step back for a day or a round or even a shot and just work on that. But for me, when I feel inconsistent, I go back to throwing putters for a round, because it teaches you really quickly, and you don't even have to do it you don't even have to like write a book about it. If you just throw the same shot a couple times with the putter. And you're like, oh, I turned that one over. Hey, I hyzered it out. It was two nose up. It was two, whatever it is. I threw it into the ground. Those discs will teach you fast. It's not, to me, it's like, it makes the game easy. Yeah, you can get more distance with a faster disc. You can torque over on an overstable driver. But, like our buddy Micah, he was like, okay, forehand, overhand with overstable discs. Then he was backhand, all big anhyzers, overstable discs, got really consistent. Now he's throwing mids all the time. And he's built up that consistency. He didn't have the best tournament this weekend, but he's going to kill it at our next tournament.
Dude,
but
Confluence is his course, man.
Yeah, dude, I'm worried about it. But I mean, I want good for him. I hope he does well. Anyway, but I do think that there is some ability to kind of work it into your game without abandoning if it's really fun for you throwing the faster discs. But for me, honestly, when that release point isn't great or anything's really wrong with my drive, I just go back to slower disc because it fixes it and it builds it. I think the spring and really the winter, I feel like my game went from having taken 3 steps back to taking 5 steps forward, and a lot of it was just slowing down.
Yeah, for sure. It's hard sometimes to slow down, man, because I'm definitely one that I just want to. It's easy to preach it, but it's hard to actually slow down and do it. And I think, that's something, a big conversation taken back with Ryan Wilking talking about throwing putters is, we have to do that, and I have to be focused on actually committing to doing that in order to continue to improve my game. But
and I honestly think your brother John is going to be really well served if he backs off the high-speed discs from time to time. Like he's got to enjoy the novelty of throwing 4 bills plus, and I think he should. I would be too. But I think honestly, when he gets back to throwing putters and mids with that power, he's going to be blown away with, one, it's going to take him a second to adjust, but 2, I think he's going to be blown away with how it improves his consistency, both with those discs and the faster discs.
Yeah, for sure.
But I think in the end, a lot of it is, going back to the release point, making your mechanics as simple as possible and then trusting those mechanics. A lot of this comes down to confidence, and confidence is built by practice.
Yeah, for sure.
All right. So one thing I wanted to talk to you about, David, would be just how do you, we're not experts at this, but how do you pick what division to start in? And then how do you pick when to move up? And it was pretty straightforward, but just to remind our listeners, how did you pick your division? And then why do you move up to advanced?
I think picking division, it was nice having some feedback from you early on. You had played a tournament before, and I think they give you some general ideas of where you should be.
Has some guidelines on their website. I definitely checked that out for sure.
Yeah, because I think it's somewhere around if you're throwing 350 or something consistently, and what your average percentage is within putting range. If it's 80%, whatever it might be, putting range, depending on what division you would be in. At the time, for me, intermediate made the most sense. That's what Josiah encouraged me to play. I think I kind of considered the idea of playing rec a little bit early on.
Yeah, for
sure.
But
you kind of pushed me into playing intermediate because that's where you were, and we were all playing about the same level.
I definitely thought that you would play intermediate and play well, but I beat you. That didn't work out how I hoped.
I kicked Josiah's butt.
That's accurate, unfortunately.
I think in general, just finding what makes the most sense for you. The best is the material they offer you. At the end of the day, though, it's how after you have your first tournament, I think intermediate is always a great place to start. If you feel like you're an average player and if you can throw over 300 feet, if you can make within 20 feet, if you can make 80% of your putts.
I think the intermediate says maybe like 5 to 7.
Oh, 5 to 7 footers. Yeah, 5 to 7 20 footers. Then that's a great place to be. I think in general, if you feel like you're an average player, it's always a great place to start. If you feel like you were at the bottom and you want to go down to rec, you can always drop down and play some rec rounds and then move up, getting the feeling of
that's
competing.
A great point.
But then intermediate, if you do play a little bit better than you expect, something that I experienced the first tournament, I expected to play down in the tournament, and I ended up having some of my better rounds in the tournament, and I ended up getting bumped up to advanced right away.
Yeah, you bumped yourself up to advanced.
Yeah.
But when you won by 8 strokes or something like that,
Yeah.
it makes sense. And you would have won at advance, so
I
makes
think,
sense.
I think in general, intermediate's a great place to start. If you feel like, though that your skill level might be a little bit more towards the rec side, I mean, start in rec. There's no shame wherever it is you're doing it for fun. We're going out there and competing for fun. If it's more fun for you to play with a bunch of the better players, then maybe play up and see what you can do to learn from them. It doesn't matter if you don't care about winning. If that's what you want to experience, that could be fun for you. Just watching the learning from those players that might be better than you.
Yeah, no, I totally buy that for sure.
Yeah.
There's so much. Sorry, go ahead.
No.
There's so much different experience you get. Like you could experience, hey, I played really poorly in this good field, but I played with better players, or I played well and had to deal with that, which was my first tournament experience as well. I didn't win, but I was leading after the first round and would have been leading in advance as well. I played intermediate. I think that for me, the 3 things I would recommend is read the PDGA website and their guidelines. I'd say talk to your buddies who have played tournaments and get their advice, and then
get them to play with you too if they aren't playing with you.
You mean
buddies
in your
to play
tournament?
In a tournament.
Yeah, force your buddies to play tournaments. That's a key. And then the third thing I'd say is look at previous tournaments at courses you've played and see how the field does. Now, they may change the layout for the course. They may make it harder or easier. They may add holes. It may be windy. You don't really know that. But you can get a general sense of like, hey, I finished around par here, and that would have been good enough for like middle of the field and intermediate. Maybe it makes sense to go to intermediate. I think it's also geographically different depending on where you are. In some places, that rec field is going to be strong because they're going to have a novice division. Or in our local area, the rec field is usually just a few players first, just starting to figure it out. And you may dominate if you have been playing for a while and you've got some skills. So I think those would be my 3 recommendations for finding a division. And then I would just say moving up is kind of up to you. The PDGA has some rating limits for how high your rating can be when you play a division. When you went to advanced, I went to advanced as well because I was like, well, I'm better than David and he won. And then I found out, well, maybe we're pretty similar. Maybe he's a little better than me. And I think I moved up too fast. I actually bumped down to intermediate after having a pretty rough streak of tournaments in advance. And I just felt like I moved up too quickly to advanced, and I didn't really get to have those experiences besides my first tournament of, being on the lead card or having that pressure. We talked about it earlier. Just what I was, the experience that I could have in the tournament playing intermediate. You scored one better than me. You would have won intermediate. And so I got to experience something and got to work through some like mental side and just strategy and all that sort of stuff. And so I really appreciated getting to play intermediate again. And my rating and my skills make sense for intermediate right now. I'm hoping that changes. I hope I play myself out of intermediate pretty soon, but I'm really grateful to have these kind of different brackets to play in where I can say, hey, this is where I'm at competitively. And then I'd say, hey, if you're blowing out the field, if you're bored, if you're not playing well and you're still placing well, then maybe it makes sense to move up. What do you think?
Yeah, that makes sense. I think you shot plus 13 under stress and pressure in order to perform and continue to be at the top. I shot plus 12 knowing that I'm going to be somewhere in the middle to like middle top of the pack. I knew I couldn't climb all the way to the top.
It was harder for me, so we'll say
it was a lot less stress on my shoulders playing in advance. So I think there is something to say about if you want that feeling and that learning experience about competing and being at the top, there's something to say about there's no shame in playing. I don't even think playing down is the right term. Because, you shot your round rating would have been around 930 for the tournament.
Yep.
And a 935 is where they bump you up to advanced. Yep. And so I think that you're at the top of where you're in a good place. You're at the top of it, obviously, but you're in a good place. And I think you have to... It's great for us to be able to have those experiences at the top to learn to move to the next level. Because if you can't learn it here, then... you're never in advance. It's going to take a long time. I wouldn't say never, but it's going to take a long time for you to get to the point to where you feel like you can actually compete with those. Because I would, when we played that intermediate tournament, I knew that I could win that tournament. I knew that if I played well, I could win the tournament. I think it's been hard for me in advance knowing that there's so many good players that I have to be almost perfect at my game. I don't have to be, but I tell myself that I have to be almost perfect in order to win this field. And that puts a lot of stress and pressure on myself because then I feel like I can't make mistakes.
And I think in this past tournament, you pressed a little bit when you would normally play conservatively, right?
Yep, for sure.
Which is a learning thing as well.
I played way more aggressive when I should have played more conservatively during that time period. And so it's a learning experience. I think I'm playing advanced, but I'm still learning a lot of what it means to compete at the top of advanced.
But you're in a good place in that if you don't play well, you won't win. Mm-hmm. But you're not going to be bottom of the field if you have an average round or an average tournament. And I think you have all the skills, and I don't think that you're just outgunned or anything like that. I think, talking to Ryan Wilking a few episodes back, he said that he wished he had played more AM tournaments as well and stayed in AM longer to build that ability to focus when the pressure is on, to lead or to come back, to chase down the lead card, etc. So I think you obviously, by blowing away the field in your first tournament intermediate, you had everybody give you such a hard time for playing an intermediate when you just killed the field that nobody was going to let you play intermediate again. But I think it's fine to be called a bagger a little bit. I actually was hoping to be called a bagger this past tournament. It became much closer than I had hoped. But I think that's good. Like, okay, when you start blowing away the field, when there's less of a competitive edge to the rounds because you just know you're, going to kill everybody, move up. And honestly, don't feel bad about experimenting in different divisions and finding that place that makes sense for you and then changing. I felt a little weird moving back from advanced to intermediate, but honestly, where I was at from a performance perspective, not necessarily from a skills perspective, that's part of it, but from a performance perspective, being able to get my mental game, my strategic game in line, it makes more sense for me to play intermediate, or it did. And I think it still does. I won a tournament. That was my goal, was to win a tournament in intermediate before I moved up. But I think it was such a good experience in terms of learning, and I think there's still a lot of learning to do on some different courses and different fields. And so I'm planning on playing intermediate for a bit. If I start wiping away the field, which I hope to, when everybody calls me a bagger and they maybe have something, maybe they have something to it they don't always do, then I'll probably move up to advanced again and join you, David. But right now, I feel like it'd be good for me to get some consistent tournament play and show that I can do that for myself, so that when I move to the next division, it doesn't feel as much like a big pressure jump.
I totally get that. I think there's something to say too about the course, because I think if it is your home course, something you play all the time. I think Watson, you might consider playing advanced because you play it all the time. But if you're traveling to a course, say in Kansas City, wherever it might be outside of your normal range of courses, you might consider playing down because you've never experienced the course. So there's a whole nother learning aspect to the game when you're having to play a new course. So I think level of comfort and just, assessing. Josiah gave some great feedback about looking at, if you've never played the course before, maybe going and playing a couple practice rounds before, figuring out what your average score is, and looking at the previous year or previous round or tournaments at that course, and seeing where you might line up as far as the scores go, and that could be a helping point for you.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I'm looking forward to playing a few intermediate tournaments, and then hopefully getting on some cards with you in the next. And after gotta. Hey, you never know, man.
If you came back up to advance, maybe it would kick back into gear for me of like, okay, now I just need to completely destroy.
Well, you still haven't beaten 14 at Watson, so you can try to keep that fire going until I can figure out intermediate, and then I'll come join you and help reignite that for you.
It's coming. It's
a harder layout now. Cool. Well, you want to get into a disc review?
Let's do it.
We have the What Was That disc review. This time we've got the Axiom Pyro. It's a 5-speed, 4-glide, 0-turn, and 2.5 fade mid-range. And David, you and I both got to throw it a bit. What did you think about it?
Yeah, I used it on my round at Salt Wash, and Salt Wash is more of a technical course, and with some shorter lines is perfect for, a lot of the holes are perfect for this disc. I loved it, man. It was fun. It reminded me as far as, man, as far as trying to figure out how to describe this disc, because honestly, it's a little bit more unique. I haven't thrown a whole lot of mid ranges. I think I threw a Rock 3 for a little bit. I have a Buzz in my bag, and I have a Zone. As far as stability wise, it's got some solid stability to it.
It feels unique.
It feels unique, and it feels really good unique. Both with, I actually didn't throw it forehand, but I was holding it in my hand, and it feels really comfortable. I think you got to throw it some forehand. I really liked it. It was I mean, the flight numbers are they 5404?
5402 and a half.
So it was very predictable, very stable. I mean, it did what I expected it to do. And to be honest with you, if I relied more on mid ranges in my game, I started to figure out, like, do I want to bag this? Is this something that I want to include in my game?
It's a weird slot for sure.
Yeah, it's something that I think can definitely fulfill certain shots. Maybe it's something that in a certain tournaments that I will consider bagging it. It's a fun disc. I really like it. I walked away, I think similar with the Onyx, I walked away feeling like I really like this disc. I don't know if I can commit to this, but I really like it because it's definitely very true to its flight numbers. It feels way better to throw backhand than the Zone does in my bag. And the Zone, I guess, would be the closest that I have, or the Buzz, but the Buzz doesn't have the stability that the Pyro does. Yeah, I liked it. I walked away feeling really good about it.
Yeah, it's a fun disc. It's a little bigger diameter than the Zone. It's closer to the Buzz. It's a wider diameter, not quite like Comet, but a larger diameter mid-range. It's an interesting disc because it's got like a bit of a nose to it, and then a bevel, or it's got a bit of an indentation. It's almost like the outer mold sticks out quite a bit more than the inner mold. It isn't a bead, but it almost functions as a huge bead. And if you don't like beads, I don't think it feels like a bead because it does feel kind of natural, both forehand and backhand. It's an interesting disc. It's nice and flat, and it feels natural. I don't know how to explain it. It feels good with the backhand and with the forehand. I'm saying the same thing over and over again. It feels good.
Dude, honestly, that I think part of the thing for me was just putting it in my hand. Like, the Buzz feels fine in my hand. It doesn't feel bad. It feels fine. But there's something about this that I would say it makes you feel a little bit better.
It does.
There is something about it, but again, I think that's what makes me want to consider bagging it.
Yeah.
And it's very true to its numbers, but yeah, I mean,
the feel does give you confidence. I don't know what it is about it, but I was just like, I want to throw this every hole. It just feels good. The plastic is great too. This Prism plastic, which kind of, I think, proton plastic with basically a proton rim. It's Axiom. All their discs have, once again, they've got an overmold technology, so they have two different plastic pieces, and they put more dense plastic in their outer rim. It's this interesting, it's almost like Champ plastic, but much tackier. It feels much grippier while not being like crazy flexy. It's still got nice stiffness to it. We could go on about the feel for a while. You should go to a store and feel one because they feel great. I really liked the feel, and I think that made me enjoy the flight even more, but I thought the flight was super interesting. It was like dead straight at first, didn't really show that overstability until the end. So you could get it to hold like a baby Annie for a while. I'm thinking about hole 11, that first shot. Mm-hmm. I threw it a little too low and just baby Annie, and it held straight for like 250 feet. And then this big flare skip to the left that got me, it's a 320 foot hole. It got me a 30 footer, which I can, by the way. Gotta love it. But I liked it both backhand and forehand. It did flex out of that forehand anhydrous. I think they were maybe occasionally a little bit nose up for me. I was getting more distance than I do with a Zone or an A3 for sure. I think it's probably has maybe a little bit more glide or something. I'd say in general, it was straight to a hard fade, and that fade was late, which is what I notice about Axiom MVP. They have a lot of times their disc has harder fades, but it happens later in the flight, which makes them super useful. It's a very tempting disc.
Oh, for sure, man.
I've been looking for an overstable mid-range for a long time and actually stopped bagging any overstable mid-range. The A3 is a smaller diameter like the Zone, and I haven't bagged any 5 speeds, and I don't know that I'm going to bag this. We'll get into it in the rating. But it goes a little further than the A3 with a kind of similar flight. And I don't know how much of it is like new disc, new feel, confidence. But when I was throwing it today, I already wanted to like it because of the feel. And then the flight was great. I was definitely pushing like 275 on the forehand with the mid, which I normally don't have a disc in that spot. I feel like the A3, I feel like I have to really huck it really hard to get that. Now this is 275 on an Anheuser flex, but I still felt like 250, 260 was easy just with a straight shot. It felt easy to power down. I don't know. It's a good disc.
Yeah, for sure.
I think this is kind of like any other overstable mid or approach disc in that I don't know that it's like a great beginner disc, but I think it's not quite as dumpy as like a Fresh Z Zone or like a Buzz OS or a Quake, like a premium plastic Quake. I think because it holds straighter longer, I think it's more useful for maybe not a beginner, but somebody rounding out their bag. What do you think?
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I think about hole 2 at Saltwash. You want something that's going to have a little bit of a late break, but you don't want something that's going to have that turn and burn.
Yep.
That's going to, because there's kind of a landing spot on top, and if you come
like
in too hard, it's going to
250, 260. Yep. Up through some trees, up on a mound, and that death behind. If you're short, you're going to be looking up 30 feet. If you're long, you're going to be looking up 20 feet with the death putt. You really want it to finish moving left on the backhand
and have just a solid kind of finish to the ground without much skip. And the Pyro did a fantastic job at that. And so, yeah, I mean, it's something that I feel like has that predictable finish, but it's not going to be so hard to the point to where it's going to get a ton of skip action. Yeah, I mean, that's something that you kind of expect with the mid-range. I guess with a Zone, I'm getting a lot more skip action. It's going to just dump on me.
I think this one, the angle, it really depended the angle for me. If it landed flat, I got a really big flare skip.
Yep.
And if it landed on hyzer, I just wanted to sit down, which is super useful because it's kind of like your Firebird.
Yeah, that's exactly what I rely on with my Firebird.
Yeah, you know how to get your Firebird to skip, or how to basically just lay on its back and be done as soon as it hits the ground.
Yep.
Oh, I was going to mention Raven Newsom, when I was messaging him, said that the Pyro was his favorite disc, and I've seen Sarah Hokum throw it well too, which I don't know that I'd heard much about the Pyro. I definitely don't hear about it as much as like the Deflector or some other MVP and Axiom like overstable discs. There's a lot out there in their lineup, so that might be part of it. And I feel like it's not as overstable as some of those really overstable discs, and it's not straight like a Buzz, so it falls in this weird slot. I'd say it's definitely a full tick more stable than my most stable 2020 Pierce Swirly Z Buzzes are the most stable buzzes that I've thrown. And this was definitely more stable than that and felt better on the forehand, but it wasn't just left out of your hand overstable. And so I wonder if that's part of it. It's just a weird slot. It's, I think, a very useful slot, but it's a weird slot.
Dang, now that I know that, it makes me want to go and watch some of Hokum's videos with when she is throwing her Pyro to see what she's doing with it. Because, I mean, she is somebody that my game is very much, I guess my game emulates a lot of what she does with her forehand. And
yeah, she has a very different form.
Yes.
And I think she likes to release on hyzer and have it turn because she uses it for everything.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I definitely take a look at it. I want to see if I can see Raven Newsom throwing it. I've watched a bit of like his in the bag and stuff with the Pyro now. It's just a super interesting disc. And I think the reason that I keep going after that is it's a weird slot. It's not utility, but I think it may be a good disc for just consistency.
Yeah.
Like, if you're trying to get the Buzz, for example, to finish, I can get the Buzz to, like hole 13B, which is at Watson. Once again, our listeners don't care, but just to explain to David, now to our listeners, it's like 270-ish, and it's just a hyzer. It's easy. You can do it with anything. I can get my Buzz there, but you have to have a little bit more touch to get it to fade hard at the end. You got to throw it a little bit more carefully, where this, I could just throw it straight and let it fade. I feel like it may be a good disc for that consistency, and I'd be interested to throw it in some really gnarly headwind and see if it holds up, because it's just super interesting disc. How about we get into our rating?
Let's do it.
All right, so our rating system, 1 to 5. Then we'll sum David and my score to 10. 1 is it's just not that great of a disc. 2 is it's a fine disc, but there's better options out there. 3 is it's a good disc, but it doesn't stand out. 4 is it's a fantastic disc, but it isn't going to make my bag. And 5 is it's in my bag, and I'm going to rely on it. And so, David, you got a rating? It's tough.
It's tough. I mean, I'm going to be between 4 and 5. I think I'm going to give it a 4. I want to give it a 4.5 because I think that I can see it at some point in my bag. I want to...
You're intrigued.
I'm intrigued, yeah. Again, we've talked before, I have a hard time committing to a new disc because I don't like having to make more choices. But man, it's a fun disc to throw. I love the feel, and I feel like I can learn a lot from the disc, even if I don't bag it. And I think depending on the course, I think Delta might be a course that this would be a good disc for. So... yeah, I think I'm going to stick with a 4 for now, as much as I want to jump it up to a 4.5 or 5, but I'm going to stick with a 4 for now. It's a great disc.
Yeah, I agree. It's a great disc. One thing I was thinking about too is in the MVP lineup, the Eclipse 2.0 reactor is kind of similar. It's not quite as stable, but it has that late hard fade. But I feel like this one feels easier to throw, and so it is a weird slot. I don't know that I have a slot for that mildly overstable mid. I could easily find a space for it, but it's not something that I've really considered bagging before, but it is intriguing. I think that I'm probably going to order a couple in my bag color scheme because I'm colorblind and anal, and just mess with them, because I think it's something that I could see myself putting in the bag depending on the weather and the course once again. But I don't think that I can commit to a slot in my bag. There is a potential it could kick even the A3 out because it's a little easier to throw. I wish they had more plastics. This is the only plastic that they have right now. I'd love if they had it in a plastic that was maybe a little less premium, so I could have something that was just a hair straighter that wouldn't skip as much. The A3 is available in every plastic under the sun from the Prodigy side. So that's availability, all that sort of stuff, but it is tempting. Anyway, so I'm going to give it a 4.5. I'll give it a 4.5 because I'm buying some. It was enough for me to buy some. David, you can hold on to this one and mess with it some. We'll have to revisit it. Maybe we'll have a revisited review after. Maybe we'll do a special podcast and after we have 25 episodes and do a revisited review of all of them, see if anything's changed. But I'm going to give it a 4.5. I'd love to just give it a 4 and walk away from it because I don't want to really mess with my bag, but it feels so good and it flies so well. It's hard. Anyway, that's an 8.5 out of 10. A really good score and a really great disc. And thanks, Raven, for the tip on the Pyro. I've been thinking about checking that one out before, but him saying it's his favorite disc definitely made me do that. So that's the majority of our episode. But David, just for fun, if you had to pick one pro on the MPO side, we'll say, to make a 30-foot putt to save your life, who would it be?
Oh, man. I think I'm going Macbeth here. If we're going this year, I think Macbeth is kind of just in the zone, and I think he's cashing everything right now. So I'd go Macbeth this year.
Yeah, I think I have to go Macbeth as well any year. Probably if he was 60, I'd still pick him. Because I just think he would be unfazed by the fact that I may die if he doesn't make the putt. I mean, we don't know each other that well. You've met him. I only talk to him once a week or so. But and Macbeth, if you're listening, just appreciate that you're going to can the 30-footer to keep me alive. But I think he's just got, ice in his veins, and he's going to make the putt. That's the episode this week. Thank you to everyone who supported the show. Thank you for listening. Thank you for subscribing. Thank you for leaving 5-star reviews on Apple Podcasts. You guys rock. We will catch you next week. And don't forget, whether it's coffee or disc golf, to enjoy the grind.